Hello, welcome to the daily highlights at Falling Walls and the Berlin Science Week. This year, 100% virtual. Thank you for joining us online. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. My name is Astrid Frohloff. I'm a German TV moderator and journalist, and I have the pleasure to lead you through this highlight hour. In the next hour, we want to give you an overview about our very exciting and diverse program. We will introduce some of our highlights. You will meet outstanding leaders from the academia, and you get a good sense of what you can expect and how to create your personal schedule for the next days. First of all, I would like to introduce to you the Executive Director of Falling Walls, Felix Rundl, who is joining me here in the studio. Hi, Felix.
Hi, Astrid.
Yesterday was the first day of Falling Walls. How was it going?
We think it was an incredibly good day. We had the first programs running on our digital platform. We had viewers from all over the globe and really a lot of engagement already happening. I'm going to put that in numbers. 13,000 registered participants on the platform to this date, and I think they will grow over the next days. More than 600 connections already being made on our BrainDate platform, which is a fantastic level of engagement, and I'm really happy we can see so many people networking with each other.
Mm-hmm. And we're having a lot of partners aboard this year, as last year as well?
Yes, that's correct. We're really grateful for the support by our partners, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank one special partner, one of our main partners, the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany. They have been with us through the crisis and enabled much of this digital program this year. And I'm really happy that we also have a word of greetings in a video format from our Minister Anja Karliczek.
So let's have a look.
Welche Mauern fallen als nächstes, fragt die Falling Walls Conference. Am besten die Mauern, die uns das Coronavirus aufgezwungen hat. Und wir setzen dabei, natürlich gemeinschaftlich, auf die Kraft von Forschung und Innovation. Wir suchen nach Impfstoffen, nach Therapien und damit meistern wir unseren Alltag während der Pandemie und sichern unsere Wettbewerbsfähigkeit. Und damit gehen wir auch die großen Herausforderungen an, wie zum Beispiel den Klimawandel. Lassen Sie uns gemeinsam diese Krise als Chance nutzen für mehr Innovation, für bessere internationale Zusammenarbeit, für eine wirksamere Wissenschaftskommunikation. Für all das steht die Falling Walls Konferenz. Ich freue mich auf interessante Diskussionen und Vorträge, die zeigen, welche Innovationskraft in uns steckt. Ich bin überzeugt, gemeinsam kommen wir stärker aus dieser Krise, als wir hineingegangen sind.
Thank you very much to the Federal Minister of Education and Research. Well, it's true, our program is packed with highly interesting sessions and great speakers, and one of them I would like to introduce to you. It's Bobby Duffy, Director of the Policy Institute, King's College in London. Nice to have you with us, Bobby. Your research subject is something which is crucial for democracies and for personal relationships. It's trust. And you are dealing with the topic of trust between individuals and trust in institutions. And I'm wondering, in the current pandemic, Bobby, can you scientifically observe how trust changes in a crisis like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right that it's vitally important to the pandemic response and our day-to-day lives right now, our levels of trust. So it's a really important question. And we can measure it. It's a complex issue, trust. There are issues with measuring it. It's difficult to do it, but the way that we do it is mostly through structured surveys, representative surveys of the public, where we want to ask people whether they trust individuals or the institutions to do something in particular circumstances. Some scholars are skeptical about what you're actually measuring in these simple questions of trust. But when you look at trends over time in using different measurement approaches, I think they are measuring something meaningful and valuable. So yes, through carefully constructed surveys with rigorous samples, I think we can measure something important about our levels of trust. I mean, it's not the only way in which we can get an idea of how trusting people are. It's really important too to look at people's behaviors, and in particular in these types of crisis situations, how people are acting as well as what they tell us is really important to observe.
And in general, Bobby, do you think it's more difficult for people to trust each other?
It's a great question, because we're fed a diet of endless stories of a new crisis of trust, that we're always just in some sort of crisis state where trust is collapsing in individuals or institutions. And the truth is, when you look at the long-term trends, there have been some declines in some countries, but it's a very stable pattern, or even rising pattern of trust in some institutions, in some contexts. So we are probably over-exaggerating this sense of crisis of trust. And you can see that when you ask questions about people of, do you think trust is collapsing? We're much more likely to think trust is collapsing than it actually is in practice. So 64% of people say that people trust politicians less today than they did 30 years ago. Only 10% say they trust them more. But when you look at the trends, we were actually just as untrusting back in 30 years, 3 decades ago, as we are now. So we've got a sense of change, but it's not really changing as much as people think.
You mentioned trust and policy. Can you tell us who are the most trusted and the least trusted groups in our society?
Well, good news from the situation that we're in now, that actually the most trusted group in a 22-country study that was done earlier this year is scientists. So 60% of people across this 22-country study say they trust scientists, and then it's doctors next. So we've got this very strong sense of trust in scientific information and medical practice as well. Teachers come next, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you have politicians, with, in this 22-country study, just 9% of the public trusting politicians, compared with 60% for professions like scientists. And then when you look at institutions, it tends to be the police and judiciary that come top. And at the other end of the spectrum on institutions, it is things like political parties and national government. One really important point, though, is it matters hugely which country you're looking at. So both in terms of level of trust and the direction that trust is going in. So in Norway, 62% of people trust their national parliament, and that's only 11% in Slovenia. It's rising in Switzerland, but it's falling in Spain. And on scientists, barely anyone has low levels of trust in Spain, but over 40% of the population in Bosnia say they have low trust in Spain, in scientists. So it is a point of being very specific. There's not one global trend or global measure of trust. It really depends on which country you're looking at and which profession or institution you're looking at.
So what can science and scientific institutions do in order to increase their trustworthiness?
Well, I think we've got a really good base, as we can see from the trust measures around the world. We are doing pretty well. And then during the pandemic, trust is held up in science. So there's one 14-country study that showed that there's been a rise in trust in both science and scientists, and a decline in science skepticism, people rejecting science since the crisis began. And we can see that across all sorts of different countries. In terms of how do you improve levels of trust, it's really about transparency and communication, being open and honest with people. There's an interesting stat in the UK that the most visited website ever in the history of BBC News websites is people looking for information about the rate of infection in their own area. People are interested in this, and what the evidence suggests is more communication, and particularly neutral communication, not aggressive communication with people, open, honest, transparent with people.
Mm-hmm. We can learn more during the Berlin Science Week. Can you tell us what can we expect from your session?
Well, we will be looking at trust, trends in trust, what the future looks like on trust, given that it's so fundamental to the pandemic response, but not just the pandemic response. It's really vitally important to all sorts of big challenges that we look at, that we are facing as countries and as the world. Things like climate change relies very much on trust in scientific information. So we need to understand it better, and we're doing various studies around Europe and around the world on what determines levels of trust and how do you improve it. And in particular, we'll be talking about the underlying emotional drivers of trust. We need to understand those more carefully, how it's attached to our emotions and our identity and our values. And we'll discuss that more in our session today.
So we're looking forward. Thank you so much, Bobby Duffy from London. Thank you for this talk. So don't forget to use our calendar function. If you're interested in this session, you will receive a reminder for your personal schedule. The quantum computing. Many people believe that quantum computing could spur the development of new breakthroughs in science. And of course, this new technology plays an important role at the Berlin Science Week as well. The Quantum Week is going to take place from the 2nd to the 6th of November, parallel to the Berlin Science Week. And one major expert in quantum computing is Jaya Balu, Vice Chair of the Strategic Advisory Board to the European Quantum Flagship and Chief Information Security Officer for Avast, an online security company. We have talked to her about the European Quantum Flagship, a true mega project, on the future of quantum and how it might fundamentally change the world as we have known it before.
Hi, my name is Jaya Balu. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Avast, and I'm also the Quantum Ambassador at KPN. To introduce the European Quantum Flagship in a few sentences would be to explain a massive project from the perspective of the European Union. We only have 3 flagships: the Human Brain Flagship, the Graphene Flagship, for new materials for graphene, and now we have the Quantum Flagship. And the flagship is investing €1 billion in quantum research. It's going on for a period of over 10 years. There's more than 5,000 researchers and members of the academic and commercial community that come together in order to realize quantum innovation and development for European prosperity and jobs and our future. So the main objective of the European Quantum Flagship is to have innovation and research which propels Europe to be one of the top 2 in the world in terms of having innovation for all of the quantum technologies, from computing, computation, simulation, and sensing and meteorology. And this, we believe, will be the future technology that will propel us as humans to embrace new advancements in science. So European Quantum Week runs from November 2nd to the 6th. It's running in parallel with Berlin Science Week. And basically, it'll present all of the work that we have been doing on the quantum flagship in Europe, but it'll also be full of discussions, both from an academic level, but also to community and outreach, so that it's also accessible to not only scientists, but more people, and talking about innovation and development and accessibility for educational purposes of all of the work around in quantum. That's what I find so inspiring. It's this ability to do something meaningful that will help every European citizen with underlying scientific breakthroughs. I think there are a number of unsolved questions and big challenges in the field, and they're in the areas of scientific challenges, but they're also engineering challenges. For example, for developing a quantum computer, we need to fix issues with decoherence so that we can have lots of qubits and that it's still stable. And there's also questions around society. How can we embrace all of the good things that quantum computing will give us while understanding and mitigating any potential downfalls around, for example, cryptography, which we use every day all over the internet. So all of these challenges are significant, but I'm confident because of the excellence of research we have in Europe, we'll be able to overcome them. I believe that the work that's being done in Europe around quantum technologies will change the world. Quantum technologies are fundamental for us to be able to better understand our universe. They could help us potentially solve climate challenges that we're dealing with now, but also COVID-19 related challenges in terms of drug development. Quantum technologies can also be used to improve drug development and delivery. So I think that these things, just those things, if the promise of quantum computing comes true, it will radically change our planet.
Well, quantum computing is one of the topics which is playing a role in politics, of course, as well. So what other topics from science are playing a role in politics? I have the pleasure to welcome now Rolf-Dieter Heuer online. He's currently chair of the group of chief scientific advisors who provide independent scientific advice to the European Commission. And he is also the former Director General of CERN. Mr. Heuer, it's nice to have you with us. You're working as a scientific advisor on a very high level, on a top level. Could you say that internationally policy today is based on scientific advice?
Internationally is a little bit far-fetched in many countries, I would say, in particular also in the European Union, because I think scientific advice as a basis, I would say yes, as far as I can judge it in these countries. Not in all countries, but in many countries. But there is also clear interest, at least in the European Commission, from the commissioners to receive information about science, to receive the evidence. But we have to keep in mind that science can only result in recommendation. Science advice can give recommendations. It's then the task of the politicians who then will have to take the decisions on policy actions, on policy regulations, etc. And there are many other aspects which play a role, like divergent scientific views, values and competing interests, opinions, beliefs, etc., etc. So the end product by the politicians might not look as you would have liked or expected from scientific evidence itself. But the conclusion on that is we need to strengthen, to boost our weight as scientists to give advice on scientific evidence to the politicians. But there is an interest clearly to take scientific advice into account when they do their policy regulations.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Heuer, can you tell us what are the hot topics scientific advisors are working on right now?
We are presently working on 3 different topics. One is the biodegradability of plastics in the open environment. This is a follow-up from the micro and nanoplastics pollution, which we are dealing with a few months and a year ago, roughly. The recommendations on that, on biodegradability of plastics in an open environment, should come out end of 2020. We are working on systemic approach to the energy transition to be published in the first quarter, end of the first quarter 2021, where we try to talk about and study and talk about all aspects of the energy transition, from the production, from the availability, transportation, etc., etc. But the most important one we are working at the moment on is on an opinion, on a paper concerning improving the pandemic preparedness and management. it's so to speak, looking back, the lessons learned from the present pandemic, and looking forward, what can be done better. This should be published, the recommendation should be published in 3 days, on the 4th of November. And it's clear that it's very important to have cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary research, for example, on these subjects. We do this paper, this opinion, together with the European Group of Ethics and the special advisor, Peter Piot, to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, on COVID. So this is really a paper which comprises many bodies, many people, and many aspects. So I have seen the draft, of course, because in 3 days it should come out, and it looks good. Mm-hmm. I'm happy.
Can you tell us a bit, how does it feel to change seats from a scientist to a policy advisor? Did you learn something from this?
Not only from this, you learn all the time. But it was not an abrupt change. From a scientist, I became then a manager when I was, for example, Director General of CERN. So this is a step in between. And I learned during that time to talk to and to talk with politicians. And I saw very often their interest in science, their eagerness to understand our science and how science works. So it was necessary to adapt the language, like we have to adapt the language when we talk to the general public. And in that case, it's very, very useful to be short, to be clear, and to use examples. But all in all, I found it rather easy to switch. What was less easy for me was the fact that the advice or the recommendations are only partially taken into account by the politicians due to the other aspects which I mentioned before. But the main thing is that you build up also, and that was a discussion with Mr. Duffy already, it is very important that you build up trust between the scientists, the general public, and the politicians. That's the key issue. Once you have trust and transparency in the whole process, you are halfway through already.
Mm-hmm. I think it's evident, Mr. Heuer, that in these challenging times, it's very crucial and important for scientists to get involved and inform policy. What is your practical advice for scientists who would like to make their voice more heard in policy?
The first advice is do it. Do open your mouth. We need more scientists to make our voice heard. And if you want to get some guidance, we have published in September last year a paper on scientific advice to European policy in a complex world. There's a lot of information and a lot of recommendation how you should do it, how you could do it, and why you should do it. The first thing I mentioned already before is the language. Adapt your language. Talk about the uncertainties in science. There are technical uncertainties, statistical limitations, for example. There are methodological uncertainties. Explain them. Try to tell people what is an uncertainty and how you tackle that. Do it independent of any interest. Do it multidisciplinary. Point out the gaps in knowledge, what is known, what is not known, etc. And also talk about the diverging views. So that's my advice. Open your mouth and learn in the process of doing the advice.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Heuer, for your advice and for sharing these very fruitful insights. And we're looking forward to hear more from you during the Science Week. Thanks a lot. Now, let's see what else we have on our program. Felix Rundel is with me, Executive Director, Falling Walls. Felix, the intersection between policy and science takes us back to a format which is a major part of Falling Walls, the circle tables, right?
Exactly. So the Falling Walls Circle, we've been doing that for the past few years, and the concept is basically to bring together leaders, thought leaders, innovators from science, policy and media to discuss the latest developments in science on a big picture scale. And what I love about the circle tables this year, now that we're forced to go digital, this is open to everyone to join, and you can really be there when the top minds at the cutting edge of development discuss how we can get out of this crisis in a stronger and better shape. And this takes us to a couple of program tips that I brought for today.
Yes, sure.
The next circle tables that are coming up, basically right after this show at 2 p.m., we have COVID-19 program, Current Trends in Vaccine Research, and this is already the best example. Top-level speakers, moderated by a wonderful moderator, Juliana Chan from Singapore, representing pharma industry and science, discuss the current developments in vaccine research. This is not to be missed if you want to be on top of the game what relates to COVID-19 vaccines. The next tip is innovation in biotech in Europe and Germany. That is taking place tomorrow in the 12 noon slot. And another example of how industry, startup in this case, and policy in this case, the federal ministry is represented here by Mr. Ludovic, how these groups come together to discuss how innovation in biotech is being pushed right now. And the third tip for tomorrow, and this is the 6 p.m. slot, is a Falling Walls Circle on industrial AI. And this is really my highlight of tomorrow, I would say, because, you know, there's a Hall of Fame in AI science, and you will find 3 of the top players in AI from the US and from Germany in this panel, and a great industry player, Robert Bosch, who is really trying to take that to the market. Sami Haddadin, Andrew Ng, Bernhard Schulkopf, not to be missed. This is a fantastic panel.
Thanks a lot, Felix. I'm sorry. Thanks a lot so far. We have more recommendations. I come back to you later. But first of all, let's come to another question. One big question in science is, how does breakthrough science translate to applications that can help millions? And what are the challenges scientists need to overcome in order to make the next step from lab to the market a success? We spoke to Craig Crews, who is a professor at Yale University, a chemical biologist and founder of the biotech company Arvinas. Let's hear what he has to say.
Starting up science is the topic under which Yale University professor and this year's Heinrich Wieland Prize laureate Craig M. Crews and other scientists from Germany together and discuss. Craig M. Crews will share his first-hand information on how scientific research transforms into real-world medical treatment.
Yeah, so my lab works at the interface of chemistry and biology, and we're using chemical approaches to answer biological questions. And so this really leads us into many different areas, but the research that I'm going to be awarded on is one that is an application of a technology that my lab has developed to hopefully drug new proteins that haven't been drugged before.
The chemist and professor at Yale University is a pioneer in his field and now honored for pioneering targeted protein degradation as a new therapeutic principle in pharmacology. The idea is as simple as fascinating. Each cell has a natural control system that regulates the lifespan of a certain protein. Usually, pharmaceuticals simply stop the function of a problem-causing protein. But Mr. Crews and his team managed to get those proteins to fully degrade, hence protein degradation.
So the biggest question is knowing which proteins are going to be the most impactful, right? With over 20,000 different proteins, we don't have the resources or the time to drug every single one, although in theory we could. And so we need to work closely with doctors, with geneticists, with biologists, who will tell us which are the most important ones that if we could control their function, we hopefully would have a clinical benefit.
So the protein degradation approach could have the potential to fundamentally change the way drugs are developed and work in the human body.
What I would like to happen is that drug companies would use the technology that my lab is developing to go after new drugs that would have greater impact for patients that currently are suffering and don't have the options that they need.
So Craig Crew is one of the scientists you can meet during the summit here. But Felix, the program is stuffed with so many scientific issues from different fields. What else did you bring? What else can you recommend?
Yeah, it's a really difficult task highlighting all of them because they're so diverse and wonderful. I want to highlight two that deal with how the current crisis affects science and the academic landscape. The first one is a German event, a German-speaking event, How Much Home Office Can Science Take? And the cool thing about it is, I think that it's not only discussed in a negative way, the panel is also discussing what positive changes from digitization, for example, we want to bring into the new world, into the post-pandemic world. So this is definitely a very interesting panel. The second one is somewhat related to it because it discusses the challenge of academic communication in a time when you can't have conferences. So conferences are a very important core element in academic exchange. And what happens when this is no longer possible? How do we digitalize all of these conversations and this exchange? And this is a beautiful lineup here with some really interesting guests moderated by my friend Sami Benchekrun with top insights into academic conferences in this crisis. The third one is somewhat different, and it is hosted by the Australian Embassy in Berlin. And this is taking place tomorrow with the title From Outback to Orbit. Very promising title, of course. What's behind it is it deals with the history and the future of the Australia-German cooperation in space exploration. So I found this fascinating as well. And it's probably going to be very interesting to listen to.
And these are great titles, all of them.
They are.
Yeah. What else do you have?
We have more. We have more. So one event that is taking place tomorrow at 11 is about the new alliances that are coming up in Europe between universities that might completely reshape the university landscape in Europe. Another one, Stadtmaschine Kunst, it comes from a science communication and arts background, where in a digital fishbowl talk, the attendees can discuss how to improve science communication at the intersection with art. So very hands-on, great workshop. The topics of trust and resilience and crisis has come up yesterday in our daily highlights and today again. And this is also a topic for today at 4 p.m. The Federal Institute for Risk Assessment is hosting this session on fear and confidence, how risks challenge society.
Felix, tell me, do we have to register for these sessions?
Yeah, it's really good to check the website because we have different models. Sometimes you have to register in advance. Sometimes you can just walk in and join on the spot. All the information is in our program calendar and will be constantly updated.
So you brought more.
We have more. We have so much more. And this is just the beginning. Quantum, again, this is a very important thread in our program. And here is the Russian take on it. The State Atomic Energy Corporation, Rosatom, is hosting this event on the Russian quantum computer. And they're pitching in 350 million to build a Russian quantum solution. This is certainly really interesting to watch in the context of the European Quantum Week. This is hosted by a startup, Reasonal. It's called Sticky Note of the Web. And this startup deals with the challenge on how to bring together content and information on the internet. This is going to be a very practical learning workshop. And I think it's also going to be a lot of fun. So I can very much recommend this one. Another game-based workshop is Collab, a game that fosters interdisciplinary collaboration. As we heard and hear all the time, interdisciplinary research is the future, so we better get good at it, and this workshop can teach you how to get better in a game-based format.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, there are many sessions based on games in this program, right?
I think it's one of the reactions to the digital formats. You have to keep up engagement, and games are really just a good way to do that online.
And it's fun.
It is a lot of fun, and you learn. So I think we have much more of these formats coming up as well.
Yes.
But to close this merry round, this session is in the evening, and it's a science show for the critical thinking that will challenge your judgment by giving you different stories, and some are true and some are fake, and you have to assess, and you will get the answers afterwards. Very entertaining, I think. Something more serious, hosted by the ESMT here in Berlin, is this session today at 5. It's about the future of banks after the corona crisis and already in the corona crisis. So we will hear what we've learned from the last financial crisis and how we can come out of this pandemic with a more resilient banking system. And last but not least, why no one is reading your open access publications and how to fix that. Title says it all. There's a large trend towards open access, and which is good, but this panel also discusses why it's not enough to just be open by concept when no one is reading it. So how can the open access movement become better and improve on its own?
Well, Felix, thank you so much for giving us this pre-taste. We are really excited to see and listen to all of these sessions. One thing else we brought with us, every day we are presenting a great story from famous photographer Herlinde Kölbel. She did a fantastic art project. She took amazing pictures of internationally known scientists and Nobel laureates. Here is a picture. This is Herlinde. You know her quite well. You helped her with the project. And the interesting thing is what came out is an exhibition and a book, right?
Yes, so this exhibition and the book both aim at bringing scientists to the broader public, and not by just sharing their science, but also sharing the stories behind their personalities. And this is what makes Herlinde's project so special. She has this special look as a photographer, but she also gets these stories out of them. And as you said, every day now we want to get one story out of her. And so I was really lucky to interview her every day, and we have another segment today that we brought.
So let's have a look now.
Today we are looking at a portrait of Stefan Hell, who's a German experimental physicist, a Nobel laureate, and a researcher who brought about a revolution in light microscopy. Herlinde, what's the story that you found most fascinating about this researcher?
He's born in Romania, and his parents always told him, you have to be twice as good as the others, then you can't be ignored. That was his measures. And then later on, he wanted to break the wall and turn down the limit of the resolution of the light microscope. And finally, he did it, and he got the Nobel Prize for that. But we don't see the long way before. You know, he had to write 30 applications to find a job. And he told me it needs a lot of stamina to go through to all these hurdles. But finally he succeeded. The wall is broken.
So tomorrow we will get more from Herlinde Kölbel. That was our highlight session for today. Thank you for joining me, Felix. Check out the calendar function now and get ready for meeting outstanding leaders of academia and highly interesting solutions they are offering. Something else you shouldn't miss is the Brain Date, our network platform. You mentioned this earlier. This is something like a Tinder for scientists, I would say. It's worth to go, and a lot of traffic is going on already. So tomorrow we will be back with a highlight session at 1 p.m. here, and we will give you more recommendations and an overview about our program. Thank you for joining us today. See you again tomorrow. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye from Berlin.